Well, good morning and welcome. I am Gia Johnson. I am the Program Director for the Solidarity Building Initiative here at McCormick. And what a warm welcome, what a powerful message and a beautiful worship service. And so as you can see, that is why I am so grateful to be a part of McCormick and a part of the Community Engagement Office. Just want to share quickly, the community engagement programming holds that the classroom has the potential to inform community and community intersects with classroom, and one continues to inform the other, bridging the seminary with alum, with congregations, community-based organizations, and the broader community. And so as I share today about the SBI program, I hope that you are able to see that this vision is coming to life in the SBI program. And so we're gonna just kind of share, each of us that will be presenting today are gonna do a quick little introduction. So I'm waiting for my colleagues, Jenny, McBride, and Kwan, and Grace to join me.
Good morning, my name is Grace Okerson. I am a student intern with SBI, and I will be offering a closing reflection at the end of our time today.
Kwan, you're on mute. Oh, we can't see you.
Oh, hold on. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
There we go. How you doing today? My name is Quan Evans, and I will just be giving a quick introduction of myself and tell you a little bit about the program and my experience at CCJ with McCormick. I'm speak about my experience. Nobody can tell you better than me.
Thanks, Kwan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny McBride. I'm Associate Dean of the Doctor of Ministry Programs and Continuing Education here at McCormick and Assistant Professor of Theology and Ethics. I also serve as the academic representative for the Solidarity Building Initiative, and in 2018 launched the pilot of the Certificate in Theological Studies at Cook County Jail. My comments will address why mass incarceration and the carceral system is something that concerns all Christians, whether we have been directly or indirectly impacted by the system, or whether we are a part of communities that have not. And later in the hour, I'll share a bit about the Certificate in Theological Studies at the jail, in particular about the pedagogical vision undergirding the program. And I wonder if it sounds like there's someone could mute themselves. There's some background noise. All right. So my concern about mass incarceration and the prison system began in 2008 when I was invited to teach in an academic theology program at a women's prison in Georgia. Soon after, I served as program director, spending one full day a week inside the prison for 2.5 years. So the main reason I care about prisons is because I came to know and love incarcerated women, students who quickly became friends. In the classroom, they shared with me what their lives were like on the inside. Sometimes I was a direct witness to the hard realities they named. And I've had the opportunity to stay connected and grow in friendship with them over the last 12 years. Now with McCormick's program at Cook County Jail, I add to my concern the well-being of our students that I have taught and begun to know in our program there. So what ties me as a privileged white woman who would otherwise have no direct connection to the prison system are sustained, ever-deepening, and mutually transformative relationships with people directly impacted by our prison system. At the same time that I've been introduced to prisons through these relationships, I've discovered another reality that claims me and directs my attention to the American carceral system, namely how central the issue is to Christian faith. Our basic theological claims about the power of forgiveness, the promise and possibility of new life, if these are going to be more than sentimentalized piety for the religious few, they must influence our thinking about crime and punishment in concrete ways. Indeed, the whole of Christian faith may offer an alternative to carceral logic and the carceral system. Prisons show up remarkably often in the Bible, as scholars Christopher Marshall and Lee Griffith have shown. In Beyond Retribution, a New Testament vision of justice, crime, and punishment, Marshall argues that although New Testament writers do not offer us a theory of penal justice, quote, there is a surprising wealth of detail on all the major components of a criminal legal system. These descriptions are written from the underside by early Christians who were victims of abusive state power. In The Fall of the Prison, Biblical Perspectives on Prison Abolition, Griffith writes this: the Bible does not present the prison as merely one social institution. It identifies the prison with the spirit and power of death. The problem with prisons is that they are identical in spirit to the violence and murder they pretend to combat. Whenever we cage people, we are in reality fueling and participating in the same spirit we Christians claim to denounce. Consider this. In the Bible, Satan is the accuser and the one who inflicts punishment, and the Holy Spirit is the advocate, advocating even for people who are guilty of harming others is holy work. Consider the first biblical story after the fall is Cain's murder of his brother Abel. God places on Cain a mark of protection from retributive violence, even as God holds Cain accountable. God responds to Abel's murder with loving concern, not only for the victim, but also for the perpetrator, revealing that divine justice is rooted in the healing and restoration of life. Consider the Hebrew prophet Isaiah connects liberation from prison with the new order God commands. I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness, I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations, to open the eyes of the blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison, those who sit in darkness. See, the former things have come to pass, and new things I now declare. About this passage, Griffith writes, Isaiah 42 is one of the earliest indications that the biblical word regarding prisoners is both simple and scandalous: liberty for the captive. Consider the psalmist who cautions the people of God to beware of political rulers whose sense of justice opposes God's own. Do not put your trust in princes, in mortals in whom there is no help. When their breath departs, they return to the earth. On that very day, their plans perish. Happy are those whose hope is in the Lord their God. The Lord sets the prisoner free. Consider Jesus's first public address, recorded in Luke 4, where Jesus places himself in the line of the Hebrew prophets as he identifies the content of the good news he proclaims and embodies. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because I have been chosen to bring good news to the poor. God sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed and announce that the time has come when the Lord will save the people. Consider Jesus's teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, teachings that are meant to be obeyed in the social and political realm, as theologians like Martin Luther King and Dietrich Bonhoeffer have shown. Love your enemies. Do not judge. Do not condemn. Forgive, or you will not be forgiven. Do not repay evil with evil. These are the practices that characterize the reign of God on earth as it is in heaven. Consider Jesus was a convicted criminal crucified by the Roman Empire, there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Consider in Matthew 25, as he prepares his disciples for his death, Jesus, tells them that whenever they visit those in prison, they visit him. So thoroughly does God identify with the imprisoned, writes Marshall, that Jesus nominates caring for the imprisoned as a criterion of eschatological judgment and one of the ways in which people may encounter his own presence after Easter. Consider when God broke Paul and Silas out of the Roman jail, everyone's chains were unfastened. No distinction was made between the so-called deserving and undeserving. The early church was led by a bunch of jailbirds, Marshall writes, and God was the prime accomplice in their escape. Consider Paul's portrayal of Jesus's death and resurrection. By exposing the violence of the cross, Jesus, quote, disarmed the rulers and authorities and made a public example of them, triumphing over them, Paul writes to the Colossians. Indeed, Paul summarizes the whole of sin and death as captivity. By triumphing over the powers and principalities of death, Jesus shows himself to be the great liberator and the whole of God's work in the world as liberation from oppressive powers that kill, harm, and destroy. Jesus made captivity itself a captive, Paul writes to the Ephesians. There's more we could say about prisons in the Bible, but perhaps the best way to summarize what I'm getting at is through an anecdote from Will Campbell, the white Southern Baptist renegade preacher, civil rights activist, and compatriot of Dr. King's, who tells the story of a man who came by his house for a visit. Campbell asked the man, "Do you believe the Bible literally?" To which the man responded, "Yes, my brother, word for word." Delighted, Campbell said, "Well, fantastic. I didn't know there was anyone else in the world who believed the way I do. The Bible says that the day has come to proclaim the opening of the doors of the prison and letting the captives go free. I've been looking for years to find someone who agrees with the literal interpretation of that scripture, because there's this prison in West Nashville, and I can't tear the thing down by myself. But if there's 15 million folks out there who believe in the literal interpretation of scripture, we can get them all together and raise that prison to the ground." I suppose one of the things Campbell wants this conservative Christian man in the Bible Belt South to see is contrary to his self-understanding. He does not take the Bible as seriously as he claims. In progressive Christian circles, I like to make an inverse claim. While we may pride ourselves on being different from conservatives, the Bible shouldn't be taken literally, one often hears. I counter that there are parts of the Bible that absolutely are to be taken literally. And if we make metaphor out of what God intends for us to hear in a concrete and this worldly way, we will miss the heart of the gospel that we are to embody and proclaim. If we had time alongside this reading of the Bible, we could also consider how our theological thinking on core topics like God's justice, our interpretation of sin or salvation, may either bolster the carceral system or serve to resist the carceral system. And we could reflect on how we might begin to shift our understanding from theological thinking that can bear bad fruit to theological thinking that is more faithful to the biblical witness and leads to prophetic engagement with the carceral system and faithful engagement with people most affected by it. But the takeaway for now is that mass incarceration in all its forms, in prisons, jails, detention centers, parole, is not merely one social issue with which progressive people of faith may or may not be concerned. Rather, the proclamation of the gospel of life and liberation, is in direct opposition to the prison system and to its carceral logic, and therefore lays claim on all of us who identify as Christian. If the good news of the gospel calls us to confront, engage, resist the carceral system, how might we do that in concrete, practical ways? With that question in mind, I'll turn it over to Gia, who will share some of what we have been doing at McCormick through the Solidarity Building Initiative.
Thank you, Jenny. So I'm gonna share my screen, see if I can do this. Okay, perfect. So I'm just gonna jump right in. In June, McCormick and Westminster hosted McCormick and Westminster Church in Minneapolis, we co-hosted a public education series entitled Isolation in Perspective. And so the series invited the audience to join intentional conversations that featured a variety of panelists speaking from the intersection of COVID-19, criminal justice, disconnection, and the church. Over the course of 5 weeks, we intentionally entered into the conversation through the voices and experiences of individuals experiencing incarceration right now. And it was important that our conversations were firmly rooted in the here and now of people that we know and love who manage every day to survive the carceral system. And so as part of the Inside Out Public Ed's initiative to bridge learning communities in the jail with those on campus, we worked with Dr. Jenny McBride to create a reading and writing extracurricular opportunity on the topic of prison abolition and the new social order. And this opportunity was to serve as a companion to the Isolation in Perspective series. And so students in the certificate program at the jail were invited to write essays that we were then, with their permission, gonna read as part of our opening reflection for each one of those series. And so the students in the program invited us to explore a series of questions. Do we even know what justice is anymore? Where is justice in an eye for an eye system of reform? Is incapacitation really the best form of incapacitation, or the restricting of individual freedoms and liberties when harms have been committed, really the best form of justice that our society can come up with? We were asked if we wanted our children or loved ones to be sent to prison or jail. And we were asked to consider if jails are truly correctional facilities, or are they a false sense of justice that says, I got my lick back, and even though I'm still hurting, at least I hurt you and your family. And so I invite each of you today to hold those questions before you as well as we engage in the remainder of this presentation. And so with these questions that the students asked us, while at the same time, these student scholars collectively challenged us to learn and grow so that we may be transformed in our understanding of the current carceral system, so that we can use the power and resources that we have at our disposal to challenge and disrupt this current system. We were also watching the murder of George Floyd and massive civil unrest usher in a national conversation on police and prison abolition. While at the same time, protesters in cities across the country were met with tear gas, military gear, and officers in unmarked vehicles. And so the experience of hyper-incarceration of Black and Brown and Latinx people and the criminalization of Black Lives Matter protesters exercising their constitutional rights are held together by a common theme: state-sanctioned violence and the abuse of power that upholds a race-based system of white supremacy. And so just as chattel slavery, convict leasing, lynching, and Jim Crow were institutions of their time that upheld this racial hierarchy, the carceral system is one of the systems of our present day that upholds this same system. And so recently, McCormick's very own Dr. Reggie Williams wrote an article entitled "White Supremacy is a Script We're Given at Birth." And when he talks about here, recent events have opened more eyes, he's talking about the George Floyd, the Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all of these incidents that have happened that kind of led up to this moment. And so I'm going to start there and share this quote. Recent events have opened more eyes to its reality, but most people still struggle with language to name it. This doesn't help. Misdiagnosing the problem makes it difficult to understand how profoundly insidious white supremacy is and how embedded it is within the story this nation believes itself to be living. It's so much more than a few bad apples. White supremacy sits deep inside of the way we've been made to understand the world. After centuries of reality-bending cruelty, if there is any possible way to address the problem, we must recognize what it is and what it is not. I highly recommend reading the full article. We can drop the link to it in the chat box. And so if we're going to investigate the legacies and realities of the penal system through the lens of power, justice, and liberation, while also talking about the Solidarity Building Initiative for Liberative Carceral Education, we must turn to our history, the origins of the penitentiary and its relationship to chattel slavery and what we call the carceral state. And so Kaya Stern, who you all will hear from tomorrow, our keynote speaker, wrote a book, and in this book, Voices from American Prisons, Faith, Education, and Healing, she writes that during the birth of the penitentiary, during 1770 to 1820s, it was common belief that criminality was the result of personal evils and dishonest companions, having little to do with social, economic, and political evils. And so history also reminds us that while indigenous peoples were experiencing genocide, displacement, and relocation, and Africans and Black Americans were held captive in the violence of chattel slavery, the penitentiary was primarily an institution created to rehabilitate white law-breaking citizens who were men to become law-abiding citizens. And so we're just going to, I did provide a timeline, but we're just going to focus on the Auburn State Prison. And so in 1819, the Auburn State Prison in New York became the leading model for prison construction. It was referred to as the congregate style model, which combined Bible study and industrious toil to produce the desired effects of a reformed person. Those incarcerated at Auburn State Prison were subjugated to a range of abuse, violence, and exploitive practices of punishment through the use of religious education, forced silence, isolation, prison labor, and convict leasing. Stern rightly asserts that the Auburn model deformed rather than reformed the individual. And tragically, this malformation and abuse was deeply influenced by Christian tradition. Ellen Lins, the first warden of Auburn and later at Sing Sing, was a Calvinist who believed that all convicts were cowards who could not be reformed until their spirit was broken. Lins is known as one of the most influential architects of the early development of the prison system. It was under his leadership and the prison policies and disciplinary practices became increasingly more degrading, punitive, and violent. With Lynn's leadership, Auburn State Prison ushered in the exploitation of prison labor as part of the character of the prison, which set the stage for the penitentiary to become the new plantation, replacing the newly abolished system of chattel slavery. So while the harsh, abusive, and exploitive nature of the penitentiary cannot be denied, history also reveals the transformative effects that prison education had on incarcerated learners. Megan Sweeney, in Reading is My Window, shares the following remarks offered by a warden shortly after the Civil War. All prisoners who can read understandably avail themselves to the privilege. The improvement from it is astonishing. Young men who 2 years ago were taught first lessons here are now good readers. And it seems as if they have changed entirely in body and mind. He goes on to say, they keep themselves neat and clean while they formerly were filthy in their habits. They have better manners and look more intelligent, more like human beings. Ignorance makes many convicts. Education alone makes the man. And in spite of the warden's dehumanizing ideologies towards incarcerated learners, access to spiritual readings and education had a transformative impact on the lives of those who were incarcerated. But this is also true. Education is transformative regardless of one's social location or their social identity. And it cannot be overlooked that the warden's comments came on the heels of the abolition of chattel slavery, and that he was referencing white incarcerated men. Blacks were primarily held captive in the economic system of chattel slavery, which by its very nature breeds the practice of punishment, violence, and illiteracy as a means to exploit Black labor. Plainly, the penitentiary was not primarily constructed for people of color. As mentioned earlier, the penitentiary was designed to provide lawbreakers, namely white men with conditions for reflection on their crimes and through penitence for reshaping their habits and even their souls. It was the abolition of chattel slavery that ushered in the constitutional rights of both freed Blacks and newly freed slaves. And no longer was the US to sanction a system of slavery or involuntary servitude, unless as a practice of punishment for the conviction of a crime. So while chattel slavery was abolished, the spirit that gave it life, a race-based capitalistic political economy of white supremacy, took on a new life in the form of convict leasing, shifting penitentiary demographics from white men to newly freed slaves. And so rather than being privately owned by slaveholders, newly freed slaves became the property of the state, white-ruled states, for violating crime laws like Black codes and vagrancy laws instituted by the state. And under this new system of slavery, the 13th Amendment made it constitutionally permissible for the Southern state to literally lease Black bodies to former slaveholders, replacing slave labor with convict labor. And in doing so, convict leasing protected and sustained the capital investment of white billionaires and the largest single financial asset in the entire US economy at that time. Black labor, Black bodies were $3.4 billion. So just as in the era of chattel slavery, illiteracy and educational resources were tools to keep Black convicts, now part of the penitentiary, as good ignorant laborers. Sweeney writes this: economic incentives completely trumped efforts to educate prisoners because African Americans were considered purely animal and incapable of learning. It was deemed wasteful to provide prisoners with opportunities for education and rehabilitation. The record of the late 19th century penal practices suggests that African American convicts were considered nothing, totally dispensable, and were therefore given nothing to read. The de jure prohibition of reading by African Americans in the antebellum South was thus succeeded by the penal system's de facto prohibition of reading by thousands of African Americans who were shunted from slavery into convict leasing. So juxtaposing the warden's quote praising prison education as rehabilitative for white incarcerated men with Sweeney's quote, it becomes evident that racism and economic incentives were woven into the DNA of the penitentiary and its practices. Katie Cannon asserts racism cannot be reduced merely to prejudice, ancient bigotry, and the strangeness of ethnic differences that the idea of a caste suggests. Rather, racism must be viewed as an inherent part of the basic political economy, capitalistic system. And so moreover, education and reading practices were not, as Sweeney says, just a neutral medium that whites happened to monopolize, but rather a defining feature of white identity, and that one that depends crucially on the illiteracy of Blacks. And so our history reveals that the penitentiary replaced the plantation as the primary gatekeeper for the white ruling class, ensuring that the theft of Black labor and that education was only a human right for those whom the white ruling class deemed human, white men in particular and white people in general. And it cannot be forgotten that Christianity and religious education played a fundamental role in shaping prison culture and practices into what it is today. And so our history reminds seminary institutions such as McCormick that theological carceral education is about persons with stories and histories and futures and legacies. And the progressive seminaries such as McCormick enter into the work taking seriously the ways in which Christianity and religious education has been weaponized, being used as a tool in practice to indoctrinate and exploit those who are incarcerated at the expense of benefiting those who are free citizens. And so as Christians, Jesus models a pattern of living our life with and for those who have been pushed to the margins. Jesus demonstrated a rugged and gritty solidarity. Duncan McLaren, in his article, Solidarity Beyond the Cliché, a Theological Perspective, provides a theological analysis of solidarity in both the Old and New Testament. And I'm just going to pull out this one quote that he says: "Jesus's solidarity has broken through the division between neighbor and non-neighbor, but it is still a solidarity which takes the side of the poor and oppressed against that of the rich and oppressor, not because Jesus sees poverty as a virtue, but because poverty is the result of unjust relationships between human beings, provoking the intervention of the Messianic King. Justice between human beings should reflect God's justice, which lies in the hearing the cry of the oppressed and then joining them in their efforts to liberate them." So what does it look like for McCormick to hear the cry of the oppressed and join them in efforts to liberate them? In the context of hyper-incarceration and the carceral state, it looks like the Solidarity Building Initiative for Liberative Carceral Education at Cook County Jail. At Cook County Department of Corrections, there are approximately 100,000 individuals that circulate through the jail annually. The daily population prior to COVID-19 was about 61,000, of which Black and Native Americans are significantly overrepresented. 33% of the total population is also diagnosed with mental health challenges, making Cook County Jail one of the largest mental health providers in the country. And while it can be rightly acknowledged that a need is being met for our friends with mental health challenges, it is problematic and alarming when prisons and jails replace mental health facilities because jails are pretrial detention centers. Most folks who are detained in a jail remain behind bars simply because they cannot afford their money bond. And too often, humans made in the image of God are housed behind bars because they are locked in a cycle of poverty or substance dependency or mental health. And these conditions cause them to be tragically detached from resource communities and social networks that have access to financial capital and opportunities to meet basic material needs, such as employment, housing, food, healthcare, and education. Plainly, the vast majority of the jail population remains behind bars because they reside on the wrong side of the class and race hierarchy. These suffocating realities of the carceral system call seminaries in the service of liberative education, offering programs of higher education in prison and jails, to continually remember that their programs first and foremost exist to serve some of the most marginalized communities in society. Plainly, programs of higher education in the carceral system do not exist to serve privileged institutions with power. It can never be forgotten that some incarcerated learners are second and third generation children of incarcerated mothers and fathers. There are 2.5 million American children who have a parent who is incarcerated. That's 1 in 50 children that have a parent who is incarcerated. And so with our history and the realities of the penal system in mind, I want to share MTS, SBI origin story. How did we get here? And so in 2017, President David Crawford announced plans to develop and launch a pilot theological certificate program at Cook County Jail. The program was inspired by our very own Dr. Jenny McBride. Dr. McBride served as a program director and theology professor for a certificate program at a women's prison in Atlanta. And so in accord with McCormick's institutional culture to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God, in 2018, a 2-course pilot certificate in theology studies was birthed with the leadership of Dr. McBride. And the program was launched in February 2018 with the course entitled Bible Foundations, taught by Dr. Josh Jibb. And I was introduced to the pilot program while taking a course at McCormick taught by Dr. McBride and Dr. Sean Nolan. And at the time I was pursuing my MA in public ministry at Garrett. And I was also doing some work around reentry entrepreneurship. And I was also committed to dismantling mass incarceration at the intersection of abolition and education. And Jenny was interested in inviting seminarians to join her in the pilot certificate program. And so she invited me to come and co-teach this Intro to Theological Reflection course in the fall of 2018. And I supported her in the classroom while also helping to shape the course syllabus. And so after the students in the course expressed enthusiasm and interest in wanting more courses, in 2019, the pilot grew into the program for theological studies at Cook County Department of Corrections. And so with this shift, the program became my ministry context for the completion of my program at Garrett. And I came on board as the project director in fall of 2019. And Jenny and I co-taught the Intro to Theological Reflection course a second time, but this time we were at Division 11. And this is where we met Kwan as one of our students in that course. And so this winter, we offered a 3rd course, Made in the Image of God, which was taught by Dr. Barbara Wilson. And her course focused on critical reflection, contemplation, and proposed concrete actions for daily living. And in Dr. Wilson's course, as well as in the one with Jenny and I, we invited formerly incarcerated folks to come and teach and be a part of the conversation and the dialogue. And they were organizers and advocates and entrepreneurs. And right in the middle or close to the end of our winter course, COVID-19 arrived. And as we were preparing for the end of the course celebration, we had to abruptly end the course, cutting off all contact with students. And it was in the midst of the COVID, what I call the COVID pressure cooker, that the Solidarity Building Initiative for Carceral Education was really birthed. And McCormick quickly pivoted in March to support our students, and we created a COVID-19 Solidarity Building Initiative. And so what we did was we provided emergency funds to support students who were in our program. We deposited money on their commissary accounts. We initiated a PPE fundraiser with a group of formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs, advocates, service providers, academics, and the list goes on, and I'll share more about them in a little bit. And then we launched a letter writing campaign where we invited McCormick community to be pen pals. And then we invited the McCormick community to help us create a prayer book, a collective. And then we hosted, as I mentioned earlier, the Isolation and Perspective Public Ed series. And so, as a program of the Office of Community Engagement and Alumni Relations, SBI exists to create an ecosystem of beloved community through liberative seminary education. And so our mission is the program would seek to mitigate the numerous material, social, and political barriers that system-impacted individuals experience while incarcerated and upon release. We envision that seminary education in jail will not only provide resources for intellectual and spiritual growth and flourishing for incarcerated learners, but that the program will also create communities of belonging and advocacy. And collectively, our program activities are really oriented around 4 practices: community building and collaboration, solidarity building and justice making, creation of life-giving works, and growth as a creative process of transformation and liberation. And so we understand justice as being in right relationship with ourselves, with God, and with others, including our relationship to institutions and systems. And so justice from this perspective demands an intentional investment in working at being in right or just relationships. And so we approach our work of justice making and solidarity building through a multi-pronged community-driven model. And so we have 4 pillars. And so the first is seminary education in jail. As already mentioned, we offer a certificate in theological studies, and the focus is intellectual, spiritual, and practical tools for holistic transformation as individuals and communities. So it is a program that is geared towards practical resources. And so right now we currently are in the process of designing, building this program out, the certificate, to about 6 to 8 courses where students would be able to engage in those, complete those over the course of 12 months. And so at the center of our program are the students. And so what emerges from the classroom drives our course offering, as well as the design of the fuller certificate program. And so that's first. Second, the marketplace drives the design of the course. Georgetown University's Public Policy Institute reported in their study, Recovery, Job Growth, and Requirements through 2020, that by 2020, 65% of all jobs in the economy will require post-secondary education and training beyond high school. Researchers from the World Economic Forum reported that the most important human skills in 2022 for the workforce will include critical thinking and analysis, complex problem solving, leadership and social influence, emotional intelligence, and active learning and learning strategies. And the third, of course, is theological education. And shortly, Jenny will share from her experience and observation 4 characteristics of academic theology programs that promote liberation, which have also been instrumental in helping us shape our program here. And so with these 3 components in mind, the classroom, the marketplace, and the power of liberative theological education, I'm going to share certificate learning objectives that Jenny and I worked on together. And so students utilize the authoritative source of experience and the particularities of their social identity to articulate the interconnection between personal and social transformation. Students use and integrate a variety of theological, biblical, interdisciplinary resources in order to construct meaning for their time and place. Students produce a clear action plan for continued growth, drawing upon key themes from the certificate courses to address the challenges of incarceration and reentry. And students nurture collegial relationships that strengthen healthy community both inside and outside the jail. And so our second pillar is community engagement and reentry support. And we really we initiate community relationships and networks that position McCormick to be a connector of incarcerated learners to churches and networks of support that could assist in reentry and seek to address the issues of mass incarceration, criminal justice, police reform, and community building. And then our third is seminary engagement, which connects students at McCormick with the work that we're doing at SBI at the jail. And it also helps support McCormick's commitment to training the next generation of faith leaders who are committed to justice, freedom, healing, and peace for all people. And then fourth is our public ed and advocacy, which really focuses on initiatives and educational efforts that increase awareness and advocacy on the issues of mass incarceration and prison education, and cultivate communities of solidarity with those who are impacted by incarceration. And so I will also say that being in solidarity with students at CCJ means that the voices of our students have the power to create change. And Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, "Where do we go from here?" he has this to say about the role of power, self-determination, and transformation. Another basic challenge is to discover how we organize our strength in terms of economic and political power. From old plantations to the South to the newer ghettos of the North, the Negro has been confined to life of voicelessness and powerlessness. Stripped of the right to make decisions concerning his life and destiny, he has been subject to the authoritarian and sometimes whimsical decisions of this white power structure. The plantation and the ghetto were created by those who had power, both to confine those who had no power and to perpetuate their powerlessness. The problem of transforming the ghetto, therefore, is a problem of power confrontation, of the forces of power demanding change, and the forces of power dedicated to preserving the status quo. Now, power, properly understood, is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. So with this in mind, we create a classroom culture where students' advocacy has the power to shift, shape, and inform the program. We together, students and scholars and the institution, become co-creators and co-laborers together. During a class right before COVID-19 arrived in the US, one of the students in our program at the jail unapologetically asked, "What is McCormick's end goal for providing courses at the jail?" He followed up his question by stating, "Is the goal to make model inmates? Because for me, I'm fighting for my freedom. The many courses that I've taken while incarcerated have transformed me. I'm no longer the person that I once was before incarcerated. I need my growth, progress, and investment in my education to impact the outcome of my future when I go to trial." And so I assured him that we at McCormick are not interested in forming model students and are far more interested in the whole of our students' existence. Many of our students have told us that they have received a better education while spending 4 years in pretrial detention than they did while in high school. This is an atrocity. This is an injustice. No one should have to go to jail in order to receive a good education. As we have already heard, that both history and experience remind us that education is a privilege and a right that not everyone is afforded, and that education has the power to transform. And so this is what makes our work also the work of reparations. And so the ripple effect of this student's advocacy led me to seek out ways that we could build power with other academic institutions offering higher education courses, specifically at Cook County Jail. And this eventually led to the formation of Community Partners in Dialogue. And so we're a group of academics and formerly incarcerated organizers who co-labor towards improving the conditions for those who are at Cook County Jail. And McCormick has been the fiscal sponsor of the PPE for CCJ fundraiser. And without the support of McCormick community, we would not have been able to raise over $6,000 to be able to provide masks and PPE and to even give stipends to formerly incarcerated coalition members. And Community Partners in Dialogue is also a place where we build community. And so Quan, who you will hear from in just a little bit, was also an active part of the work that we did there at the PPE group, or the PPE fundraiser. And so what makes the work we're doing here at McCormick unique is the institutional support the program has received to pursue the institutional support, as we can see today, this McCormick Days, and as well as McCormick's interest to pursue advocacy and policy change. And so we have entered into the conversation with a local faith-based community organizing nonprofit to do a joint fellowship opportunity. And so the fellow would work collaboratively and in community with others to support a vision and further develop shared policy and advocacy efforts for opportunities, specifically around, and in particular around educational opportunities. And so as you can see, SBI not only provides intellectual resources, but also seeks to build a community within the jail and outside of the jail in order to work alongside others to create beloved community in our local neighborhoods and broader society. And so deep within my spirit, not my intellect, I'm coming to hold that the significance of this work is not just for today, but is being inextricably bound by the broader society, by the broader history and legacy of abolition. I'd like to think that we are grabbing hold of the baton and the struggle for survival and liberation that both Black and white abolition ancestors have been passing down from generation to generation. We're finding our place within the already operating modern day underground railroad system. And our place within this modern day underground railroad here at McCormick is theological education. And so before I pass the mic to Dr. Jenny McBride, where she will share more about the first pillar of seminary education, I want to share a quote from Darnell Moore in his lecture entitled, "Let's Get Free, A Case for Abolition Theology." I want to connect the legacy of abolition, of the abolition movement with our current modern day abolition movement. He says this: abolition is a form of analysis and organizing practices that is not centered only on the removal of the systems that harm us, but the process of imagining into being the life soul affirming tools that ought to go in the place of things that harm us. According to Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who is a prison abolitionist, she says this: abolition is figuring out how to work with people to make something rather than figuring out how to erase something. Abolition is ultimately a politics and practice of creation, not destruction. It demands that we broaden and diversify our imagination to activate, complicate, and stretch what Robin D.G. Kelly calls our freedom dreams. With the question in mind, when academic theological institutions in the service of liberatory theological education exercise their institutional agency and deploy their resources and networks beyond the academic institution and directly serve marginalized communities, they create capacities to become institutions of solidarity builders and justice makers. Their institutional character takes on the form of leadership as what I'm calling servants of solidarity. And within the context of incarceration, these academic institutions become an incarnational presence of the exhortation in Hebrew 13 to remember prisoners as if you were in prison with them, and people who are mistreated as if you were in their place. And it also calls us into our, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recover the sight of the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And so this is the work that we are doing here at Solidarity Building Initiative. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to Dr. Jenny McBride.
Thank you so much, Gia. That's amazing work and so excited to be a part of it. So as Gia said, I am going to speak just a little bit more about the certificate in theological studies, especially looking at characteristics of our pedagogy. Two of those biblical passages that I mentioned in my opening reflections and that Gia also just mentioned are well known to most of us. Luke 4, where Jesus says, we can't repeat this enough, in his first public address, that the gospel proclamation is liberty for the captives and freedom for the oppressed, and that the time has come now for this to be realized in visible and concrete ways. In Matthew 25, where Jesus says that whatever you do for those who are hungry, thirsty, estranged, in prison, you do for him. These verses in Matthew 25, known as the works of mercy, are addressed not to individuals, but to the nations. They are addressed to societies, communities, institutions. Therefore, at McCormick, we've asked, what does it look like for us as a theological seminary to obey Jesus's concrete command to visit those who are jailed and are experiencing incarceration? One of our first responses was to do what we do best, to do what's at the heart of our mission as a theological school, provide theological education to students who are eager to learn through the certificate in theological studies at Cook County Jail. So we've entered this work as part of a larger national movement that sees higher education in prison as a vital resource in the work of advocacy and resistance, learning from leaders in the movement like Kaya Stern, who's tomorrow's keynote. We also enter this work aware of the problematic history of religious education in prisons, particularly the way Christian education has been used to bolster the prison. Christian education has played a significant role in supporting the prison system historically and today. Gia mentioned this amazing book, Reading is My Window, Books and the Art of Reading in Women's Prisons by Megan Sweeney, where she offers a history of reading practices in prison and shows that questions about reading and rehabilitation have shaped US penal policy since the founding of the penitentiary by Christian reformers in the late 18th century. Sweeney shows that the act of reading, especially the act of reading religious texts, has been used to discipline and control people for the vast majority of penal history. In the late 18th century, Christian reformers created the penitentiary to counter the brutality of corporal punishment that they inherited from England. And the original purpose of the prison was to give lawbreakers an opportunity to practice penance. In the United States, prison authorities instantly adopted a model of reading called bibliotherapy, the selective use of reading for therapeutic treatment. While this model rightly recognized the healing potential of reading, it restricted approved texts to biblical passages, prayer books, and religious materials that focused on the alleged moral failings of people in prison, the aim being to induce moral change in accordance with narrow social norms. In doing so, reformers assume society's problems are primarily rooted in the deviant behavior of individuals, not in unjust structures and systems. They also turned incarcerated individuals into religious projects, relegating people made in the image of God to the status of things, to objects in need of correction, instead of subjects with agency, in turn degrading their personhood. The therapeutic model remained in effect until the 1970s, when it began to overlap with a disciplinary model, which viewed reading as a privilege, not a right, and endorsed reading only when it advanced the state's goals and objectives. A final shift from rehabilitation to retribution caused both a substantial decline in prison libraries and extensive restrictions on prison education, which were accelerated by Congress's elimination of Pell Grants for prisoners in 1994. Religious education in prison, however, need not be in the service of the carceral system. As Sweeney argues, education on their own terms enables incarcerated people to resist penal control of their minds and spirit. Under certain conditions, reading in prison may enhance critical thinking and social consciousness. Therefore, Christian education and prison ministry may either serve to bolster the prison or may play a liberating role. For Christians, the work we do inside jails and prisons must be in the service of liberation if we want to be faithful to the mission of Jesus, declared in Luke 4. I define liberative academic programs as theological education that affirms the dignity and insights of incarcerated students, and therefore affirms their shared experience as a vital authoritative source for theological reflection, that combines social analysis and theological analysis, and that addresses the interconnection of the personal and communal through courses that attend not only to the students' individual growth, but also to their basic social and political needs. These include, for example, the need to have a sense of belonging or community, a voice in decision-making, and the opportunities to express agency. So I just want to briefly describe 4 characteristics of academic theology programs that promote liberation. There's certainly more characteristics we could add based on the experience others have had teaching in prisons and jails. And I highlight these because they are the attributes that have stood out most to me as I have taught in this setting. And as Gia said, they've also provided a foundation for us as we've developed the theology certificate program, from the course offerings to the learning outcomes. So first, liberative programs will develop skills of critical analysis, including the ability to ask hard questions of the authoritative sources we study, whether that authority is scripture or the theologians or other authors we read. Doing so will offer a relief from a prison environment in which questioning is strictly prohibited. It also will offer relief from religious programming meant to indoctrinate incarcerated people with specific views on religion or morality in hopes that they think or behave in certain predetermined ways. Instead, the aim is to offer students resources that may help them survive jail or support them as they move back to their old neighborhoods. This focus on critical analysis also means that the courses are open to all interested students, as any religion course in a college, university, or progressive seminary would be, regardless of faith tradition or lack thereof. In an environment in which the majority of religious programming comes from conservative sectors of Christianity that cater only to Christians, this inclusive move is rare and necessary. Religious education, like Bible studies, are often devotional in character, with the aim being personal growth, moral development, and the handing down of official religious teachings. More rare are religious programs, be they in houses of faith or in jails and prisons, that aim to develop skills of critical analysis. Indeed, sometimes religious folk fear that critical analysis of our scriptures or doctrine may lead to a decrease in faith or a loss of faith. But this was not the view of the early church fathers, who thought that loving God with one's mind was necessary for increased faith and devotion. Jesus himself commands his disciples to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. The practice of loving God with one's mind is captured in the 12th century phrase, faith-seeking understanding. Second, theological education in jail should be concerned not only with the students' inner spiritual liberation, but also with their embodied lives, the whole of their personhood. This means we need to hold a critical stance towards the carceral system, a system that causes emotional, psychological, and bodily harm to those it incarcerates. It also means that we cannot be afraid to address the complexity of what faith or spirituality might look like in a context in which people are confined. As instructors honor the complexity of their students' attempts to survive or resist the dehumanizing forces of the jail or prison, it's possible that our own moral and religious frameworks might be challenged. Third, a liberative program of theological education will resist the moral reductionism and moral dualism of the prison system that divides people neatly and firmly into categories of innocence and guilt, victims and offenders, citizens and felons, of fundamentally good people who are law-abiding and fundamentally bad people who are criminals. Instead, it will affirm the moral complexity of real human beings. Each of us has, at different times, been victim, witness, and perpetrator of harm, the only variance being that for those who live in conditions defined by poverty, racial inequality, and pervasive violence, the harms in question tend to be more severe. The moral reductionism of the carceral system defies what we know about human beings, that we are complicated and changeable, and that none of us can easily be defined by the worst thing we have done. Our categories of innocence and guilt should already be disrupted if we hold that we are responsible for the unjust structures in our society, even complicit in them when we maintain an unjust status quo, especially those of us who are systematically advantaged in our society. Moreover, there are resources within our faith traditions to help us conceptualize that we are all at different times and in different relationships, victims and offenders, those who have been harmed and those who harm. We can enter into conversations about harm, about forgiveness, repentance, restoration, and healing, not as people who are distinct from those who are incarcerated, but as people who also have to do the difficult work of facing our varying relationships to harm. Finally, theological education in the service of liberation will foster mutually transformative community for those inside and outside jail and prison walls. Higher education in jails and prisons not only has the power to create some semblance of community and trust among incarcerated students in a place where it is extremely hard to do so, since the classroom provides a rare opportunity to build relationships and gather for conversation. It also has the power to connect people on the inside with resources external to the jail, and people on the outside with the indispensable knowledge and insights of those directly impacted by the carceral system. Going into the jail offers an opportunity for people like me to grow in solidarity and relationship with those who are oppressed by the carceral system, to learn from them and follow their lead. In addition, by mutually transformative community, I mean that those of us who teach courses at the jail enter this space as people also on a journey towards liberation from the social, political, economic, and interpersonal forces that may have us bound. This experience of mutual transformation is best expressed in a line attributed to Australian Aboriginal activist Lilla Watson. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is tied up with mine, then let us work together. For over 250 years, the vast majority of religious education in prisons has not been characterized by these liberative practices. Therefore, this vision of theological education in jail and prison as part of the novum, to use the words of the prophet Isaiah, the new thing that God is doing in this moment of heightened awareness about the harm and evil of the carceral system. We are called to live into the new creation, the new world, by making concrete the liberation God brings. And McCormick's certificate in theological studies at Cook County Jail is one humble endeavor to do so. So with that, I want to turn now to a conversation with Quan Evans, a former student in the certificate program.
Hello.
Hi, Quan.
Hey, how you doing, Dr. Jenny?
Good. Can I see your face? There you are. Awesome.
Sorry about that.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. I believe you're maybe multitasking right now, so I really appreciate that you're that you're taking the time to be with us. And I have to say, seeing your face through this little box makes me wish that we were in person once again, but we're so glad that we have this technology.
I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So Quan, I'm wondering if you would just open by just first sharing a little bit about yourself, anything you want all 125 people out there to know about you.
Okay, well, first off, my name is Quan Evans. I'm a young African-American male. I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. I grew up, well, I was born in Stateway. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stateway Project. Left there, and I was practically raised in the Clare Courts, which is another project that was located on 43rd and Cicero. I grew up there. I went to the Hirsch Grammar School, stayed there for about almost 10 years, and I left there, moved on 86 and Phillips for a year, left there, and then we transitioned like going further south, which we moved on 57th and Prairie. I stayed there for about almost 2 years. We left there, moved a little further down on 68th and St. Lawrence, which I stayed there during my high school years. Well, the beginning of my high school years and my 8th grade graduation. We stayed there for about 4 years. Left there, then we came to the south side, right on 72nd and Marshfield. That's where I stay now. It's presently where I stay now. Well, previously, I was staying there. But it was an experience coming up, growing up. I went to Harper High School. I graduated from Harper High School in 2007. I had a college experience at Kennedy King. I went for a semester. I was studying criminal justice at the time, and then I had a lot of little problems, little bumps in the road. I eventually dropped out of school, something that I wasn't supposed to do because my goal was to become a police officer and then eventually a judge. But it's never too late to go back to school. I had the experience of before I was incarcerated back in 2015. I was falsely accused for first-degree murder. I did not commit. I was held from November 2015 to January 30th, 2020. But I didn't come home to February 1st because I had another case pending, which is an aggravated UUW. I just recently completed that case back in August. Thank God for that. I don't have to deal with that stuff no more.
Mm.
But I had a nice experience. Some life lessons was taught to me. I was able to go back to school while I was incarcerated and really focus. I'm gonna say because I wasn't focused when I was out, when I was free going to school at that time, because there's a lot going on. I had a few of my buddies that was killed and in the streets and stuff. So it's just rough. It's a lot of distraction, women, the fast life, and like I said, I had an experience with the theology class, and we had a few other programs that was introduced to us while I was in there on the tier that I was on, and it just came. The very first program that we had, it started in February of 2016, which was Willow Creek. It's a church-based organization, Tom and Winnie Horton led that congregation as far as like coming out to the jail. They with their ministry, just basically giving us lessons about the Bible.
They had the brownies, right?
Yeah, yeah. They brought us brownies. They used to bring us food and stuff like that until they started cracking down. There was a lot of officers that worked there was didn't want us to have food for whatever reason, you know. But
Yeah, we want to
anyway,
say for the record that we tried to bring you those brownies. We tried hard.
it's okay. I'm free now. We can have all the brownies we want.
Let's go get some brownies.
Yeah, and I also had a touch with us venturing into that um, program. There was more programs that was added on through Chief Terry Williams, which was he was over the programs at the time. I think he higher up now in the jail now. He's like one of the top securities up under Tom Dart or something like that. But anyway, you know, I had a great experience with them. I actually got a chance to meet him because he used to come talk to us. He wasn't like a lot of the guards that was just mean and, you know, it's just like, okay, treating us as if we're nothing and nobody. He actually came, sat and talked with us, spoke with us. You know, I liked the vibe, and and I didn't feel that it was like fake. It was genuine, I would say. And we also started another. They also started another program called the Second Chance Program. It's basically a cognitive behavior therapy program, just like, you know, to get you to change your way of thinking. It's kind of like what's the term I want to use? Like
Like social emotional learning?
yeah, it's like social emotional. It's also like what's the word I'm looking for? 'Cause you got to take it when before you become a police. It's a class you have to take. It's called I can't think of the name of it. But
It'll come after. When you're off the call, you're gonna be like, man, I remember.
yeah, yeah. So it's all a part of that. But yeah, it's like a cognitive behavior therapy class, and it actually works. It gets you to really think clearly. You know, a lot of people think, but they don't think clearly. And it basically taught us like how not to try to use drugs as a coping mechanism for whatever problems that we're going through. You know, things like that. It says stop and think before you act. You know, because you know it's consequences to everything.
Yeah.
So it was a class based around those like logics and stuff like that.
Quana,
Yes.
I was just gonna ask, how did you get plugged in with what made you want to take a theology class?
Well, what made me want to take theology because I always was into religion. I'm very spiritual. You know, I can't really say because I done read the Bible. I read some of the Quran. And pretty much what I get out of it, it's one thing that like I say I'm spiritual because it's one thing that I understood. I read the Bible. I still read it to this day. And it's one thing that God never did, and that's separated separate religion. He spoke upon all religions, but he never separated. He never said, I'm Christian, I'm Muslim, I'm this, I'm Hebrew. He always spoke upon all religions. So that's why I consider myself spiritual. And that was another reason that made me take up the theology class because I wanted to get a better understanding. I had my understanding, but I wanted to get a professor and others' perspective on certain things that come out the Bible, you know, because their view might be different than mine. So that's what made me take up the theology class. And then it was also a great experience for me to start back school, get back in the habit of writing because I like writing. I'm very good at it. I took a class while I was in that. It was another college that was in DePaul University. It was the Inside Out program, and we actually mingled with the students. They had the students come in and sit with us last year, and it was a great experience. You know, it was a lot of writing assignments, like 10, 12 pages. You know, I get good grades. You know, like I would say B's and A minuses. I mean, it helped me really express myself through writing, because that's what I'm good at. So it was a good experience.
Awesome. So Quan, would you help us understand a little bit more about what it was like to be in the classroom? Because most of your time when you were at Cook County was, on your tier, right, on the deck. So could you
Yes.
kind of describe what, if anything, what kind of shift there was entering the classroom? What was it like being on the tier, and then what was it like being in the classroom?
Well, the structure was different from being on our tier opposed to being in the classroom, because we was actually with outside people, and more so the attitudes was like, it was phenomenal. Like, it wasn't like, opposed to us being on the tier all day, you got everybody angry about something, mad. That's a lot of people they just like have evil hearts or evil spirits. I wouldn't even say that. I would say that they just a little bitter, because a lot of them locked up. They can't do what they want. They can't go where they want, eat what they want, wear what they want. So me entering the classroom, it gave us a different vibe. And then actually mingle is like, you get in touch with the outside world, outside of our business. And it actually it helped me release myself. I was able to relax. I wasn't always on edge. Like when I was in the classroom, I was, like chill. And it's just different things. It's something to do. It helped me focus. So that was part of my experience of going in the classroom opposed to being on the tier. Like I say, I felt, my opinion, I felt that the energy that you guys brought, it was genuine. I didn't get a bad vibe from it, And I greatly appreciate you guys, you, Jenny, and the rest of the team that came with you guys. Was it Osan?
Oh, Johans?
Oh, Johans, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they came and gave us a little bit of their story, because they had similar stories. They've been through the same situation that we've been in. So us just in Benny Lee, just us being just me being in the present with those guys who actually been through some of the same things and experience, and you guys advocating for us, it just gave me a different experience, a different vibe, being in the classroom opposed to us being on the tier. Because on the tier, you stuck around 47 other guys and personalities all day, every day. We only had 2 TVs to watch, 3 phones. If you all out and it's only 3 phones on the day, everybody trying to compromise 16 people to a phone, is always tension in the air. So I didn't feel that when I was coming in the classroom. With my class work, it actually gave us something to do. The programs that we had, they give us, homework assignments from time to time, but just that escape that we had weekly, like, okay, we sit on the deck all day, every day. We don't go nowhere. So for us just to be able to get out that classroom for an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, it was everything. It was like I was at peace. Like I wasn't stressed. I wasn't worried, and I actually enjoyed that, So that's what I get.
That's so awesome. I just want to say that the energy that you all gave to us too, it's mutual. And it's so fun to be able to be in these conversations with you all. So I want to ask, you took 2 courses, maybe 1.5 before you were released with McCormick, and one was the one G and I taught, the Intro to Theological Reflection. The other was Made in the Image of God. And I don't know if you've looked at these recently, but I was just looking at your final project that you did for the Intro to Theological Reflection. And you named a number of key themes that stood out to you at the end of the course. I want to name a couple of those. And I just want to see if you want to comment further on any of them, or if there's some other practical wisdom that you've taken from that course. So you named, this was in the midst of lots of great insights in your final paper, but you named 4 things. That we are to anticipate God's future by living that future here and now. You remember we read Jürgen Moltmann, the German theologian, that spoke about that. That you are not alone, that we are not alone, that everyone has dignity, which I think came a lot from maybe the MLK, Martin Luther King readings. And then from the sermon from Rowan Williams, that hope includes restoration and healing. I'm quoting you here: Jesus comes to build us up from our past and restore us like a new beginning.
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful writing. So I wonder if you just want to comment further on any of those, or anything else that stands out to you from your McCormick classes.
Yeah. I would like to elaborate a little bit more on hope, because hope is everything. Without hope, we have nothing. Restoration. Everybody need a little restoration. Just restore. Sometimes you have to let go of the old. And take on something new. Even if it's just for the experience. If you don't like it, you can say you experienced it. We are not alone, and I say we're not alone because some people may feel whole when they're in a room full of people and still feel lonely. But I say we're not alone because God is always with us. He's always on our side. He's always in our prayers. He always give us signs. It depends on how you look at it. It depends on how the individual look at it and take it, because it could be a sign. It's something as simple as let's say if you have kids, one of your kids will say something, you'll be like, why would this baby ask me that? Or it could be from a coworker. It's just encouraging words. It's something you may need to hear. So I say we're not alone because God, He speaks through other people to us. That's why I say we're not alone. And just prayer. I say prayer changes everything. No matter what your situation gonna be, it's not your final destination. A lot of things in this world is temporary. Only thing that's gonna last forever is God, and we all need that, and we all have to really sit down and really take heed. There's nothing wrong with helping others. I love helping people. I do it all the time, and I don't be expecting anything from that. I do it because I do it from the heart. Because God always blesses me, so I don't mind sharing my blessing with others.
Absolutely. I just want to highlight one thing that you said about the "we are not alone," and that you said earlier about how important it is not only for the instructors, but for guest lecturers. President David Crawford's come into the classroom, and how important it is for people from the outside of the jail to come into those spaces where folks that are detained in the jail are living, to provide sort of a taste of the liberation of the outside world and to create that beloved community. So I appreciate you reminding us of that, of how important it is, even the presence of other people to come into that space.
No problem. I greatly appreciate you guys.
Quan,
Yes.
as I was listening to you, I was just thinking, every time we have a conversation, I can just feel the warmth and hospitality of your spirit and your energy. When you say you give from your heart, that is one of the things that that is you. And on that note, you participated with us in the Community Partners and Dialogue and the fundraiser, and you were so instrumental in that work with us. Would you kind of share a little bit about what you did and why was being a part of that? Why'd you say yes?
I was on the panel with you guys for the mask and PPE, because I'm not only concerned about my health, but for others too. You can't just look out for yourself. And I said yes because I know what it feels like to be how can I say, I would say semi-helpless to a certain degree due to your circumstance. Some of those guys, current circumstance, some of those guys really don't have nothing. I've been in there with them. Some of them don't have family. Some of them was orphans. Some of them was just, parents died while they was in there. Some of them don't have siblings. So I had that experience. If I could be a listening ear or a help of any sort, I don't mind, putting my time into it, helping, whether they want it or not. I don't look for it. One thing I learned, you can always plant a seed. You may not see it grow, but at least you know you planted it, and it might sprout. You might not be there to see it sprout, but it'll sprout, and then they'll share the same love and put it in that same energy towards somebody. It may not be who you want them to do it to, but it eventually they'll get around to sharing that same energy that you gave to them, because they're gonna always remember that he gave me something I can take with me. And the only way to keep what you got is you have to give it away.
Mhm. Mm. So do you still talk to the guys? You still,
Yes.
yes?
Yes.
That's
I actually I spoke with I'm not sure. I don't think you're familiar. Well, yeah, you are familiar with Elliot Peterson.
mm-mm.
No. Yeah, he's one of the guys. He was on the deck. He was a hard worker. I actually just talked to him day before yesterday.
Okay.
They called, check in. They asked me certain stuff. He tell me like little stuff that's going on. Like he was telling me that they was on lockdown because a couple of guys in there, was acting crazy. Then the guards, you know how that go.
Yeah, absolutely. You are such a bright light, Quan. Everywhere you go, you are this beaming bright light, and so we're grateful to know you and to have you here with us. And I know, we've talked a little bit about what you want to do next. I know school is important to you. So where are you with that? Like, what is next for you?
Well, what's next? School is huge for me. That's my next step. I thank you too, Gia. You connected me with Rosiana Pinto.
Right start.
I'm gonna finish registering for school. I'm trying to do my financial aid. I will be going for medical assistant. Like I said, a lot of you guys are not familiar, but I did have experience before I was incarcerated. I was actually working at Mount Sinai Hospital in the OR as a surgery technician. So I'm familiar with like a lot of the procedures, the things, phlebotomy, things of that nature. And it really took an interest to me. It's something I never thought I'd get into, because I'm like, I don't want to be around, watch people die or this or that. But it was a good experience. I work with a lot of doctors, a lot of surgeons, and a lot of them, they do have genuine love. They really care, and they inspire me to want to further my career, like and get certified in the medical field. And plus, it's something that I really want to do, because I feel that it's always a need for somebody in the medical field. It's always a need. It's always a job there. And it's like I say, the experience was great. I had a good time. I met some awesome people working in the hospital. A lot of the doctors, they was cool. And what really inspired me and motivated me to want to do that, I actually like they got residents. Those are the people that's going to be doctors, and it was a lot of African American men, young men that come from the hood.
Quan, you're on mute.
That inspired me. So I'm like, they can do it, I can do it too. So that's part of my motivation. So I got to get that done. So that's what's next for me: school, and eventually I'm gonna open up my own business.
Entrepreneur. What do you want to? What kind of business?
Well, I got a number of things. One of them is I want to open up a car lot.
Okay.
In a car wash. That's like my two things. Like I'm real good with people. I have excellent customer service. And I think a lot of people just like the energy I give. So a lot of people cling to me. So that's what's next for me.
Amen. Amen.
Also, I want to say within the next 2 years, maybe 3, I want to buy my mother another house. So it's work in progress. I'm gonna buy her one first, and then I'm gonna buy me one. Then maybe I'm not sure. I don't have any kids, but maybe I have some kids. Maybe 1 or 2 one day. I gotta find the right woman though.
This is true. Quan, I want to say that there is no doubt that you will accomplish all the things that you've set out to do. And so Jenny, myself, President Crawford, Nanette, all of McCormick, you have a family here, you know. So we hope that you will stay connected and yeah, stay connected with us. Jenny, do you have anything more?
No, that was amazing, Quan. I just hope you'll stay for the question and answer because I'm sure there'll be some questions directed your way.
Okay. Okay.
And I don't know if you can see the chat box, but if you can, take a look. I mean, there's so many awesome praises and amens and yeses, Quan. So you have been a bright light here with us. And so thank you.
Oh, I thank you guys too. You guys been amazing. And I needed this, you know, to help me vent a little bit, get a few things off my chest.
Good. Well, there'll be some more, as Jenny said, we have the Q&A going in just a bit. But Quan, do you have anything more that you want to add before we wrap up just this portion?
I would like to say, I'm interested in whatever you guys have to offer. You know, if you need me, I'm here too. You know, I'm all for like the panel, taking masks and gloves to the jail. You know, I mean, I'm working too, but you know, I can always work around my schedule. If it's beneficial, you know, for you guys, I can always work around my schedule. I don't mind helping.
We would definitely want to stay connected and plugged in with you. So thank you for that.
No problem.
Okie dokie. So we are going to, we are almost done with the program. So thanks folks for hanging with us. I'm just going to do a really quick, I'm going to do a quick screen share and maybe I'll do a quick screen share. Actually, no, that's not going to work out. So I just wanted to share with you all a call to action, which is not pulling up for me on my slides. So maybe we can send it out via email. And so we'll scrap the call to action and we'll invite Grace to come up and just kind of close us out, and then we'll move into the Q&A.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Gia. And thank you for this facilitating this rich and diverse conversation. This closing reflection that I'm going to share actually came from a reflection lifted up during one of our SBI team meetings. Our co-laborer and colleague in this work, Blake Collins, is a current student at McCormick. He's unable to be here with us today, so I'm sharing this on his behalf. The psalmists in scripture express lament, sadness, confusion, anger, disbelief at the injustices and oppression they witness, and at times an almost pleading hope that their God is paying attention to their realities and lived experiences. We're grateful for the voices today, particularly the young Black voices that can express through written word and song the wisdom of psalmists while giving language to our collective frustrations. It's holy to name anger. Their words are freeing. They're an invitation to feel and yell out alongside them, our neighbor, our family, our kin, our people are not yet liberated. So we invite you to listen and to feel the words of hip hop recording artist and record executive J. Cole in the song Caged Bird, featuring Omen. In and out of county jail, this is hell. See the young Black males in packed cells, with heads down and fists clenched tight, thinking I could bust a hole through this wall, and just might. It's just like the Caged Bird. I sing a song hoping they open up these bars and send a homie home. I cry when I'm alone. I'm wondering why would God send me here, knowing that they hate us, knowing that they make us feel like we're evil, so we kill our own people. Without a second thought, in every lesson taught by OGs, we full of real Black wisdom, so we proceed, like real people who have been stripped of our humanity. I see the judge's eyes and know that he ain't seeing me. This goes out to the childhood friends that do in years, prison tats on they backs like souvenirs. We wish that you was here. A mother's tear spilled on this page, a brother's tear spilled on this page. How many days left? And can you find peace when you released, still filled up with rage, back on the streets just to peep, you're still a caged bird. The psalmist writes in Psalm 69, verses 1 through 3 and 33. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no foothold. I have come into deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me. I am weary with my crying. My throat is parched. My eyes grow dim with waiting for my God. For the Lord hears the needy and does not despise God's own that are in bonds. And so we wait in expectation for a time where the caged bird is set free. Ashe and amen.
It's nice.
Ashe and amen.
Amen.
Quan, I am absolutely full, and so thank you for what you have shared of yourself today. The way that you presented yourself in this moment to be your full self before all of these folks who see you and who hear you. And if you read the chat, who are praying for you and believe in you. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
No
And
problem.
I
Thank
would
you,
just like
guys.
to say we have about 5 minutes for Q&A, and there are a few questions. One of the ones I want to start with is, you know, we always talk about Martin Luther King's quote when he says, they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. And then when Jenny mentioned that one of the incarcerated said, if you've come here for any other reason than knowing that your liberation is tied up with mine, right? What does it really mean? And this Jenny, Gio, Quan, what does it really mean? What does it really look like for our liberation to be tied up with someone else's? And what's the act that we take?
I would say the action that we have to take, we have to keep fighting. You know, you got to fight the good fight. And prayer, like I say, prayer changes everything. Like one verse that I really stick with me in the Bible is Proverbs 3:5. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and all your mind. Lean not on your own understanding." So that's what resonates with me. That's one verse I'll never forget. Study daily. The serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to change things I can, the courage to change things I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's another that's a prayer that stick with me too. And it's like I feel that it's more that could be done. It's just a lot of people I know that it's a lot of evil people in this world that don't want certain things done as far as liberation, because a lot of people benefit off it. And I say if we had true liberation if it wasn't beneficial for a lot of people, or even if though the powers that be had to experience some of the same things as African American males had to experience.
Thank you, Quan. Gia or Jenny?
Well, I just one, excuse me, specific concrete example comes to mind that, you know, if people are locked up, they're not sharing their gifts and insights and resources with their communities and families. And if there's one thing I've seen teaching both at Cook County Jail and in a women's prison in Georgia, it's that people who are in prisons and jails have extraordinary gifts. And all we're doing is tossing them aside under some myth that these people are not deserving or are not going to contribute, when it's very much the opposite. So I just think that's kind of one concrete way that our liberation is tied up together, that we're missing out on the gifts of people who are detained in jails or incarcerated in prisons and detention centers.
Thank you. And Jenny, this one is specifically, Gia, did you want to speak to that?
I was just going to kind of piggyback on some of what Quan was saying around folks who are privileged, kind of if we had that experience. And so I think that there's something about proximity and getting close. I think like Brian Stevenson talks a lot about that. And I think like finding our place, finding how we are complicit regardless of wherever we're coming from, whether it's class, race, gender, whatever pace of social privilege that you have, finding your place in that. And so I would say like there's inner work that we need to do to interrogate the ways that we are blind or complicit to how we participate, and actually, even though we may not want to, but we actually bolster, we actually, there's a word I'm looking for that I can't find right now, but we uphold this system, being unaware that we are.
Thank you. And Jenny, early in your presentation, you talked about carceral logic. Can you expound on carceral logic?
Sure, yes. So really the term carceral logic is just referring to the logic that, as Judah said, bolsters the whole carceral system, the whole prison system, which includes more than just the actual prisons and jails, right? So what are the foundational ideologies, logics that uphold the system? There's a number of ways we could define that. I think when I do my theological work, some of the first things that come to mind is carceral logic has to do with the way that we deal with harms. And carceral logic says you deal with harm by punishing people, which in punishment, of course, is intentionally causing pain. So carceral logic says that the way we deal with harms is by continuing to harm. Versus of course Martin Luther King says violence begets violence, right? But an anti-carceral logic would say no, the way we deal with harm is through restoration and healing. So that's one example. Another part of carceral logic is an exaggerated individualism, as opposed to an understanding that as human beings, who we are people who are social and communal. So when harms are done, we want to blame individuals, and we think if we can just lock away an individual, we've somehow distanced ourselves from that violence or from that harm. I think that sort of a moral dualism is another part of carceral logic, that we easily and kind of neatly separate people, into good and bad, or into offenders and victims and offenders. And as I mentioned, and of course, in a white supremacist society, the way we conceptualize morality is already racialized, it's already racist. The prisons are inevitable and necessary. That's part of carceral logic. So those are just some examples. We could add others, but it's just, my point was that the whole of the gospel and Christian faith can be understood as the opposite of carceral logic.
Well, thank you for that. And Gia, if you could, can you say more about the plantation ghetto concept that you referred to as you were presenting?
Yes. So I was reading some of King's work, and what comes to mind for me, and I think it also follows what Jenny was saying around carceral logic, is that that we create spaces for social control. And so we can look at the plantation as a place for social control, where we are restricting, we're using violence and abuse and all of these things for the benefit and the profit and profitability for the powers that be. And so we see the same thing when we talk about creating ghettos, and where people are forced into small confined places where they lack resources, they don't have the ability, they lack quality education or lucrative jobs, they don't have access to other basic food like grocery stores. And so these are ways to create social control, oftentimes for the profitability of other people. And so I would say that's the connection between the ghetto, the plantation, lynching, Jim Crow, the carceral system. It's this apparatus of social control that benefits the empire.
Thank you. I'm sure we all acknowledge and know that we could go on for hours with this topic alone. And if we look in the chat, we know that folks are very interested in this. So a few questions that have come across is, will you be willing to share your presentation? I know this session is being recorded and will be made available, but would you be willing to share your presentations? Or is this the way that they should access it again?
Sure, I'd be happy, Nanette, maybe to send it to you, and you all can send it out to the people who are present here today. That'd be fine.
Absolutely. Gia? Absolutely, thank you. And so, you know, there's a favorite quote of mine that simply says, one's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions. And I can say, from hearing you, Quan, hearing you, Gia, and hearing you, Jenny, and reading along with the chat, that minds have been stretched and new ideas and thoughts have been thought. And so we are grateful for your presence here today. We are grateful for the work you do with SBI. And we are grateful for your presence in the world, Quan, and the way in which you exercise and exude your faith and your willingness to not be crippled by the brute, as Maya Angelou said about Nelson Mandela, that you have not been crippled by the brute, but instead you choose hope. And instead you choose to keep pressing forward. So we thank you all for joining us for this session. We will now take a 30-minute break and then head into the Trauma Symposium. And don't forget that is a separate link, so make sure that you have registered or will register. And so we will see you back in this format at 2 o'clock for the State of McCormick address by our President David Crawford. So thank you again for joining us, and we will see you soon.